Welcome to the Edgar Allan Poe podcast with your co-hosts Vicky Ray, Nez, and Keith Chowgo. Exploring book to screen and everything in between, delving into the dark despair and the sinister world of Edgar Allan Poe.
Hello, welcome to the Literary License Podcast. We are the Rondo-nominated Literary License Podcast, and today we are doing our Edgar Allan Poe's episode. And today we're doing The Black Cat, and we're also doing the 1934 classic, The Black Cat film. And today we have with us Vicky Ray. Say hello, Vicky.
Hey, everybody.
And Tom Diamond has bled over from the Dark Shadows Podcast to join us today. Hello, Tom.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Keith, Vicky. Yes, I have crept over literally crept over from the crypt at Collinwood to join you here. I am very happy to be here because among my other interests are the Universal horror cycle films of the 1930s and 1940s, and the 34 Black Cat is among them. So thank you for inviting me on, Keith, for this.
Tom is a stealthy one. We have to keep an eye on him.
There I go. For those of you who don't know me, I do a little voiceover work on the side, so you'll excuse me if I do some imitations and accents regarding this today. But Karloff and Lugosi, obviously, as I'm sure a lot of you are big favorites of mine.
Oh, I bet.
Oh, absolutely. I could go into their biographies, but that's not really the subject of this podcast. So go right ahead. Please proceed.
So what we're going to do is what we always do at the beginning of our podcast. Well, what we've been doing since the beginning of the year is talk about our roses and thorn moments of the week. And let's start with you, Vicky. What's your rose and thorn of the week?
That's going to be really nice. Okay. Well, the rose is I'm with my parents because they need a little help this week, so I come up for a week and a half to be with mom and dad in good old H2O town. So that's my rose. I'm having a good time visiting with my parents. My thorn, however, is people that cannot take a joke on social media and report you because they're little bitches.
I can say, yeah, people are missing senses of humor, which you think would have probably fell, since we had a whole 2 years of it, you think they would have gotten over it by now, but looks like it's going to continue all through the 20s. Yay.
You would think they'd tell me by now.
That's how 2030 is a different kind of world that we're living in.
That's right. I love everybody, but God, just text me or something, say, hey, I'm offended. Don't report me. For crying out loud.
Really?
I can't believe I've gotten away with as much as I have anyway, but
I get away with a lot on social media.
Yeah, you do, but you're like the warm and fuzzy asshole. People like you, even though you're a douche canoe sometimes.
I wonder how that ever happened.
All the time. It's not fair, but we love you.
And then if someone does attack me, next thing you know, there's like hundreds of people attacking them for attacking me.
I know, I'll probably get a bunch of horrible messengers about don't pick on Keith.
It's what you call mass psychosis. They either love him or they hate him. And that's
He's worse than I am. He's 10 times more insulting and offensive than I ever am. And he gets away with it.
Well,
that's like Lugosi would say, that's what you think.
That's right. What about you, Tom?
You sell your soul to Satan, and it comes with some fringe benefits. It's just that.
Indeed.
So, Tom, what is your rose and thorn of the week?
Well, for those guys here that do not watch the dark or do not listen to the Dark Shadows podcast, I had bariatric surgery in December, and my rose is that as of today I am down 53 pounds.
Oh, that's excellent.
Congratulations!
Thank you very much.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and hopefully my goal is 100 pounds. I wasn't that bad when I got it, but I needed to be done. And so I'm continuing my little kiddie meals each day of 4 ounces. My stomach is now the size of a banana due to the gastric sleeve operation, which I had, which takes out 85% of the stomach. And I have been very diligent. My fiance, who is a British nurse.
There you go.
Yeah, there she goes. And
I didn't know she was a nurse.
Yes, she is.
Cool.
And former director of nursing, although she doesn't like me to brag about her. And she'll probably kill me when she hears this. But she's been very punctilious in terms of helping me out on the diet pre and post surgery, going through 3 shakes a day, 1 ounce every 5 minutes, the whole bit. But it has paid off, and I do feel a lot better, and hopefully I will continue to get better. And people do not recognize me on the street, which is also a good thing. But
Especially if you owe money to people.
I had that.
Vicky, I think you lost weight too. So there you go. Anyway, so that is my rose. The thorn, and I'm sure it's been discussed before, but I'm very concerned about coronavirus. I live in Florida, and we have a few documented cases there. New York has 22 at this point. I come from Brooklyn originally, for those people who haven't figured that out yet from my New York accent. And Governor Cuomo expects there to be dozens more. Just everybody take care of themselves. But Keith, you have some information on that you could speak
Wash
to.
your hands for one. Don't touch your face.
Yep.
Well, I mean, we've been going through seminars at work for it, and basically, basically what they're telling us at the moment is that 80% of the population will get it. The fatality rate's only for those who have lung diseases, elderly, and are immunosuppressive. But other than that, it's pretty much just runs like the flu, and out of the 80%, over 79% of those will come out of it unscathed, sort of thing. But yeah, the best thing to do is keep your hands washed, and you don't need to go mad or wild. Basically, more people are dying from the common flu than they are from the coronavirus. But it's something to be concerned about, but nothing to panic over.
Which is good news. But of course,
unfortunately, it'd be nice if it just affected stupid people, but it doesnn't. So,
and again, we all watch The Walking Dead. We're all prepared in case this happens.
So I do. If someone gets, please email us at info@llpodcast.com and please answer the question: why are you stockpiling on toilet paper? It's not going to help you.
I mean, food or something, but not toilet paper. I mean, everybody's in Australia is totally out of paper for the loo.
I only hope though that they do not charge what they have started to charge for some of the tests here in the U.S. Somebody got a bill for $3,200.
That's insane.
Absolutely disgusting. I mean, for the
it's just a swab they can do. I mean, the swab shouldn't cost that much.
I mean, come on.
$3,200. They're trying to gouge people.
Wow.
That's an understatement, and hopefully Congress will do something about that. They did pass $8.6 million, or in the process of passing that, to deal with this. Hopefully there will be a vaccine. They thought about a year for a vaccine, although I did hear that Israel developed something 4 years ago because they were experimenting with chickens. We, of course, are not chickens. But that may come across in 6 months. So we can hope.
See. Everybody hang in there. Don't panic.
I'm quite grateful. Right. I'm quite grateful for the coronavirus because now I go on before I get on the tube, I sit and just pretend I'm blowing my nose and cough a little bit, and I just get so much room now. First time on my way to work, I do it every day now.
Oh, I got to remember that if I need personal space.
Yeah, if you need your space, all you got to do is cough a little bit and blow your nose, and people just walk away
people
from you.
Clear the car.
People were staying away from each other on the flight. If you were coughing, there was people coughing. They weren't coughing by me, but people were like, whoa, you know. But I mean, before people were coughing, no one thought nothing of it. Why weren't we this scared of the regular flu? Kills what? 70,000 people last year.
Well, I think that what people need to do is that if you're going to get advice from professional medical help and keep away from social media.
Medical.
Yeah, and keep away from social media and keep away from most news media things. If you want to get information and you decide you want to delve deeper into the coronavirus, I suggest going to like 10 to 12 different sites and then everything that you learn from these 10 to 12 different sites, go down the middle and that'll be your truth. So at the moment, it's a good way. It's good for clickbaiting at the moment, and it's very good for selling news, which is what's happening with it at the moment. So I guess that brings me to my rose and thorn of the week. My thorn of the week, just dealing with, I guess what Tom was saying, coronavirus. I'm dealing with about 200 to 300 phone calls a day about it where I work, and it's just getting tiresome because there's a lot of panic out there. As far as my rose of the week is concerned, I guess my rose of the week has to be the Netflix series Love is Blind, which is kind of a reality scientific-based situation where people date each other without seeing each other, and then they propose to each other and whether the wedding is going to go through or not. And they fall in love with people just based on their conversations, and then we see what's going on. And it was a very interesting, and the reunion was finally shown because they taped this a year ago. Some of three of the couples are still married, very, very happy, and it's quite interesting, actually. It was quite an interesting thing to watch, and I quite enjoyed that. And Castlevania Season 3 has started on Netflix, and I'm very, very pleased with that, which warms the cockles of my little heart. Nothing like blood, guts, and heads being cut off in an animation violent way, which makes me feel warm and fuzzy all over.
I finished watching Hunters the other day ago. I did not expect that end. That I did not see coming. Don't
say anything. I haven't watched it yet.
No, I wouldn't do that. It was brilliant. I didn't expect it. It was a total twist that I was not expecting. That's all I can say.
It's getting mixed reviews, which I'm very surprised to see, because that is such a good show.
Excellent.
I loved it. What I've seen so far, I've watched 3 episodes. I mean, maybe 5. Yeah. I think I've gone halfway through. And of course, it's in Brooklyn, my hometown. A lot of it's in Brooklyn, although it has other locales as well. And very, very true to form, very, very. And, I think the guy Weil, who created this, I think he's the grandson of the Holocaust of the guy from the Holocaust that's going after the Nazis who persecuted the Jews. I'm blanking out on
Simon Wiesenthal?
That's it. He's the grandson. I believe. Yes. David, is it David Weil?
I started getting interested in that. I took a whole semester about Nazi Germany for whatever reason. I just couldn't believe what happened. Mm-hmm. And I was watching The Final Solution and stuff like that. And before people start handing out digs to people, they really need to watch this before they call people Hitler from now on, because really, it was unfathomable. I mean, some of the stuff I didn't know about, I've been watching this, and it's like, I mean, even this movie, the show Hunters, there was facts in there I had no clue. How they said, yes, this happened? I didn't know about NASA. I knew about Paperclip, but not NASA.
Oh, Operation Paperclip, sure, absolutely.
I didn't know about NASA.
Yep.
So that's all I got to say about that.
Well, I will tell you also that when I went to college, my alma mater, Long Island University, I'm giving them a plug now, but the chairman of the psychology department at that time was Gustav Gilbert. And Gustav Gilbert was prison psychologist at the Nuremberg war trials.
Wow.
So he was It was the course was abnormal psychology, and I'll never forget it because all he talked about was what he did during the Nuremberg war trial stuff, and he talked about the fact that all the people he interviewed, Ribbentrop, Goering, Himmler, it was very and they all were in complete denial. We did what we were told. And plus, I had relatives that I lost in the Holocaust.
That's sad.
And their stories were quite unfortunate. The Twilight Zone, by the way, and of course we're skipping, but the Twilight Zone did a great episode called Death's Head Revisited for the Twilight Zone fans, which talked about a Nazi guy that went back to Auschwitz, I believe it was. Auschwitz still stands to this day, and that was also where they filmed Hunter, part of where they filmed Hunter. And they filmed that on the Auschwitz, in the Auschwitz camps. Very, 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 very good stuff. But I liked Hunter. It brings anti-Semitism to the living rooms of people who are not familiar with it, as well as the Holocaust situation.
Terrible.
Yep.
So I guess that will lead us to the Black Cat. How that noise is there, we will never know.
10 minutes in a tangent. Okay. Tangent.
Can I do some of the music?
Well, The Black Cat is a short story by American writer Edgar Allan Poe. It was first published on August 19th, 1843. Of the Saturday Evening Post. It is a study of the psychology of guilt, often paired in analysis with both the telltale heart. In both, a murderer carefully conceals his crime and believes himself unassailable, but eventually breaks down and reveals himself impelled by a nagging remainder of his guilt. In this, the catalyst is basically a black cat who's very friendly, and what we do is have a man, as he's descending himself into madness, is actually descending himself into alcoholism, which causes the faithful killing of his wife, which also leads to him killing the cat and the cat resurfacing. So, Vicky, what are your thoughts of the Black Cat?
The Black Cat, which had nothing to do with the movie we're going to cover, except the Black Cat, of course.
Very little.
It was one of, I've always liked this story. You know, it was required reading back in the day, of course. But this is one of the few Poe stories, short stories, that you don't really have a problem understanding. Mm. Even though, what is it? It's got that narrator. Was it like the third person narrator? First person. So, I mean, and it's not a reliable narration. They always say that about Poe. It's not a reliable narration. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what they mean by that. Maybe you can enlighten me.
Well, first-person narrative basically is a lot of books, or a lot of first-time writers actually for writing the first-person narrative. It's basically when you're talking from your point of view. And right. If you're going to write your story and you're writing it from your point of view, that's first person. And then there's third and second person narratives. Third person is the main. Second person narrative is kind of an odd thing that's very rarely used. But third person is actually when you're the narrator and you're like the god and you oversee everything.
But every time I do research on any Edgar Allan Poe story, they're always saying that the narration is the narrator is unreliable, like Telltale Heart. Ligeia, all of them, unreliable narrator.
Well, the reason why they're unreliable narrators, especially with Edgar Allan Poe stories, is that the narrator is always someone on the descent of madness, and he's going into madness. So it's either he's just come out of being mad or he is still mad. So that makes him an unreliable narrator. So because we're seeing him from his point of view, we're also not getting a lot of backstory, like in Ligeia when we cover Ligeia. Right. We don't know anything about Ligeia or anything like this. We don't know any. All we're doing is seeing everything through his point of view, but it's his point of view. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a truthful point of view. Well, and we get the same thing in Telltale Heart. We also get the same thing in The Fall of House of Ushers, which we did as well, where we get the narrator coming in, and we're actually seeing things through his eyes, but at the same time, we're not seeing things through any of the other characters' eyes. So since we're seeing it through his eyes, he's unreliable narrator.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
It's his point of view.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say from a general standpoint in any first-person narrative of any story, not just Poe, because of the subjectivity of the first person involved, and they're putting their own opinions into the particular situations and how they interpret the events. That's as distinguished from the third-person narrative, where you have a more omniscient sense of what's going on. So I don't think we should just blame Poe for that. I think that that's just a defining characteristic of a first person versus a third person narrative. Don't you think so, Keith?
Well, I think the reason why Poe uses first person narrative, especially like in 1843, we are dealing with an era where people like to put themselves in. So I think, and at this point, most writers wrote in the third person. Where with Poe being one of the first authors to write in the first person, what happens is the reader now becomes the main person of the story. So they're reading, I am doing this and I am doing that, which actually created a whole spawn of stories afterwards where basically the first person narrative within horror or within other fiction, especially Gothic fiction, where I became, you are now the person telling the story. And if you also remember at this point in time, Christmases, unlike Christmases today, but Christmases this time, and the reason why a lot of these stories would come out around Christmas time is because people used to sit around and tell each other ghost stories, or they read their favorite ghost stories to the family, and that's how they would say it. And these stories, these short stories that Edgar Allan Poe did at this time, because you have to remember there's a huge illiterate population at this time.
True.
Only a few people could read. So what would happen is the person who could read in the family would read these stories to everyone around them. And the stories would have a more of effect if the person's like telling a story, say, instead of saying, well, Vicky went up the stairs and Vicky opened the door very slowly and the door creaked, and behind the door there was this ghostly figure. But now if you change that to I climbed up the stairs, and as I climbed up the stairs I felt a shiver down my spine, and you got someone reading the story to you and saying it from that point of view, you also get more of an emphasis and the horror becomes a lot more real.
Right.
And it also can make it also seem like it's, instead of like a third person narration, instead of it also makes it feel like maybe it's true. Maybe this did happen. Because you also got to remember that Poe is also the grandfather of crime fiction as well, which we'll get into next month with the Murders of the Rue Morgue.
Arsène Lupin, I believe. But what I was going to say also is what you're talking about, Keith, and they call it an education, reading with expression. So that people back then, and your point is well taken, people back then who were able to read with expression to their families and friends, it was also kind of like a major selling point for the author if the short story or novel was well done in the first place, and then on top of that, the person reading was able to read with expression rather than in a monotone voice. I mean, nowadays, how many people read to their family, except maybe to the kids when they're going to sleep? But how many people really do that anymore? And it's almost a lost art. It's a lost art. Yeah.
That's true.
I guess Edgar Allan Poe, if you're looking at it from, if you think about his future and how his work should live, I have to sit there and say that a lot of reason why his work is still very, very much alive today is because it's written in the first person. So you have people like Vincent Price, Jonathan Frid did a whole tour around the States with it. Just reading Edgar Allan Poe stories, and it's still going on today. Ian McKellen,
The Telltale Heart. I'm sorry to interrupt. The Telltale Heart, which Jonathan did, was one of his favorites. And when he talks about louder, this was Jonathan. That was Jonathan emoting. He may also have done the Cask of Amontillado, but I'm not sure.
But it's quite interesting that you can, that because of the first person narrative, is that this doesn't have to be turned into a play, and most of these haven't been turned into a play. What they do is just basically some person standing on stage doing a monologue and just reciting the story verbatim. And because of that, you now go to the theater and you have like a really eerie kind of a night out, and all this is one man, reciting Edgar Allan Poe.
Well, I did want to bring.
You can't do that with a lot of other authors. If you think about it, there's not many authors you can do that with. So.
What I did want to bring up, though, was the fact that if this protagonist, or whatever you want to call him, because he's an anti-hero, had lived today, he would have been arrested immediately for felony. Exactly, for felony. He would be a felony. I think it's now a felony to abuse an animal. I think it's a federal crime. I think it's maybe a federal crime.
I hope so.
But can you imagine taking a cat's eye out and then hanging him in the backyard like a Chekhov, like a character out of Chekhov.
I was just saying, if you're an animal rights activist, then this Edgar Allan Poe story is not for you.
Well,
what's quite interesting is though that the eye gorging scene that we have in the Black Cat is basically, it's pretty much synonymous with his alcoholism. As he descends in alcoholism, therefore he thinks the cat is against him. So to cut out the eye of the beholder. So therefore what you have is, therefore the cat can't see who you really are. And that's what that symbolizes. Right. The hanging of the cat is the hanging of oneself, the hanging up, because he figures the cat is judging him. The wife doesn't judge him at all. We don't know anything about the wife. We know that she's taking his side.
I feel sorry for her.
But we don't know anything. But we don't know anything about their relationship whatsoever, because he doesn't really go into that. It's about his relationship with the cat. So he's fine with the cat. He turns on the cat, and in kind, the cat stays away from him. And because of that, the cat has spurned his love. He cuts out the eye of the beholder. And then when the cat further, doesn't no longer want to be near him, that's when he hangs the cat. So therefore, he's hanging the thing that's rebuking him, sort of thing, even though he doesn't take responsibility for himself at all. And then, of course, when the next cat or the same cat come back, depending on how you want to read this in the story, that is basically guilt resurfacing from what you have done. And at the same time, the same thing about the fire. The reason why he's an unreliable narrator, because the fire does start in the house, but we don't know why the fire starts. Now, you remember, this guy is an alcoholic. He could have started the fire, but this is also a guy who's an alcoholic who doesn't accept responsibility for the choices that he's made in his life.
Yep.
You notice that's a recurring theme, though, through any of Poe's works. It always has something to do with alcohol or drugs, and some, like we always say, descent into insanity. And it's never an uplifting story, one way or the other. There's no happy endings.
Well, I was going to make the comment that I do believe that in the short story, he talks about when he did get together with the wife because they had things in common back then. Originally.
They loved animals, didn't they?
They loved everything. They had a lot of things in common, and animals were one of them.
Happy.
So in the beginning, he does speak to the relationship between the two that way. It's just later on, the alcoholism, the demon rum, really separated him. And God bless her that she just kept up with him all those years.
Well, that's what alcoholism does, right?
Well, it's very rare that people stay a happy drunk for long. The longer you drink, the more miserable. And let's face it, if you look at most home violences or domestic violences are caused from alcohol.
Yep.
So sort of thing. It's quite, but we do, the narrator, what we do have is, a person who doesn't accept responsibility for anything in his life, even at the very climactic thing where he accidentally kills his wife. He decides he wants to get away with the crime. He buries it behind the wall and then thinks that he's done such a good job that no one's going to catch it, that when he knocks on the wall and the cat starts screaming and the police tear down the wall and realize the cat is walled in, he doesn't accept responsibility that he killed his wife. It's the cat's fault that he got caught. It wasn't his fault that he got caught. It was the cat's fault. So
the cat was
projection. It's projection.
And what I do like about the Black Cat story, though, is probably it's up there with Telltale Heart and Hot Frog, which we also covered. And it was so easy to read. It was like, if you're going to be introduced to Poe,
it's one of his easiest short stories.
Yeah. And it wasn't florally, but I noticed with Poe, this is what he does when he has a man who's a common man, or man who's just common, or and I noticed that when he's telling a story from their point of view, the stories always read like modern fiction that we're so used to reading. Right. If the person comes from breeding or from a high class, then they're more written into like the Shelley Gothic style of writing, where it's all very, very flourishy and stuff like this. And that's what I found quite interesting as we've been covering Poe in September, is that you can always tell by the way the book's written whether the person is high class or just common class.
Right.
From the point of view that we're getting. But I have to sit there and say the Black Cat is quite an interesting thing, and it does weigh on your mind once you've finished the short story. And the short story probably will only take about 20 minutes to read at the most.
Yep.
And I find that you hang up on it, but it does stick in the back of your mind for quite a long time. It does kind of meander around in your subconscious for a long time, which I found
Well,
quite
it's a horrible
interesting.
story. It's a great story, but it's horrible the way all the events that transpire in it. And, you know, it's like, I can't imagine coming, even if I was pissing drunk, coming home and pulling my dog's eyes out or my cat's eyes out or whatever the night.
Well, I mean, it does, but I think that when Poe does put things in a story like this, and you have to remember, we also have the Telltale Heart, where we had a guy descending into madness who also was an alcoholic, and was the one thing that the reason what causes him to kill the guy is because when he opens up the door and his light catches the guy's eye staring at him. And that's what drives him to madness. And we have the same parallels here with the Black Cat.
True. Yeah.
But I mean, to inflict partial blindness is one's own vision of moral goodness as well. So, I mean, that's also a sign of this time. And you also have to remember that Black Cats at this time were considered like devil or superstitious. People were highly superstitious in the 1840s here.
Yeah.
And the Black Cats do symbolize, superstition. We still have the same thing. Don't let a black cat across your path. Sure. We do keep some of these superstitions today, so they are unfounded people.
Black cat yesterday, that cat has no use for me. I went over there and it's like, I got a picture of it just eyeballing me, like, who is this and why are you in my home?
That's different from in Egypt. In Egypt, the cat was reverential. Cats were, of course, Bast, the cat goddess, comes from the fact that they were in the royal palace. They
were sacred. They were guardians of the underworld.
They were sacred. They dressed them in jewelry and everything. And I think even today in Egypt, I don't know whether it's a crime to kill a cat, but that's why they have so many of them, because the cat is regarded as a figure quite different from the superstitions that have developed around it in other areas of the world.
I think another thing that's quite interesting that we have with the Poe story is that there are other kind of symbolisms that Poe is using here. We also have the fire that destroys narrator's house, which symbolizes, complete moral disintegration. Right. The impression of Pluto on the wall, it represents his unforgivable and incorrigible sins. And which is, and you have to remember that the cat, the new cat that does sally up to him and follow him home, starts off with a white tuft, but as he descends more and more into his madness, as the white tuft becomes a noose, which is quite interesting. Which also that's another extent of what we're talking about with unreliable narrator, because did that white tuft on the cat become a noose, or is that just what the narrator is seeing? Is this what we're being told? Is this really happening? Because no one else is commenting on this. So, but I don't know. That's quite an interesting story. I quite like the story a lot, actually.
I do. I always have.
It's good. No, it's good.
Is there any more comments we have about the short story, The Black Cat?
Other than Anger Boy ends up losing all.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into The Black Cat, the 1934 film. Now, it's important to know that The Black Cat, the 1934 film, has nothing to do with the Edgar Allan Poe Black Cat story. But we will be doing a film dealing with the Black Cat story, which will be in The Two Evil Eyes, which will go back into the Black Cat as a film. And we'll also be doing another Edgar Allan Poe story. So the Black Cat will resurface as a more direct version of the short story that we just read. But The Black Cat, the 1934 story, is an American pre-code horror film directed by Edgar G Ulmer and starring Boris, Karloff, and Bela Lugosi. The picture was the first of 8 films, 6 of which were produced by Universal to pair the 2 iconic actors. So basically, without giving too much away, we're going to cut to the trailer, and then we'll come back and we'll give you a bit more about the makings and the plot and everything like that. So we are back after the trailer.
When I said poison, I meant it. Look.
Monty.
What's all this about somebody trying to kill Abigail? Where did you find out about that?
I gave that to Mother tonight. She bawled me out for it and said she was going to give it back to Abigail in the morning.
Oh, then you're the guy that slugged me.
Yeah, and I'll do it again anytime you train down to my weight.
You really want some tea?
Yes. I take my tea strong. It makes me sleep better.
You'll sleep.
Oh, saccharine, huh? It keeps your weight down. Quite anxious little things, aren't they, huh? Pretty strong for their size, too.
Drink, and you'll sleep.
Mr. Penny. What are you doing with that coffin?
Well, the coffin is a very fine hand.
Yeah, well, what's that body doing in there?
Hello, welcome back to Literary License Podcast, and now we're discussing the 1934 Universal classic, The Black Cat, starring Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi and David Manners. So, Tom, what do you want to tell us about The Black Cat, the 1934 film?
Well, first, I do want to say that although the book and the film are basically very different, there is one subtle similarity between the two. And that's that in the short story, the Black Cat comes back. Now, it can be reinterpreted. It can be interpreted either, as you've said, Keith, as a different cat or a reincarnation of the Black Cat that was killed. In the movie, we have a recurring theme. And in fact, Dear Boris gives a speech about the fact that the Black Cat is deathless. And that is covered to a certain extent in the original version of the 1934 movie, which we're going to be discussing. It was reshot at the end for reasons which we're going to talk about also. But in the original version, actually, the way it's seen, Lugosi kills the cat in one scene by throwing something at it. But then you see Karloff holding the Black Cat again. And in fact, in the original version, the way it was shot, the Black Cat came back in a number of scenes that were either never filmed or were on the cutting room floor. And so we're going to get to that. But in any event, so... let me go into the synopsis now, and this is taken from Wikipedia, and thanks to Wikipedia for that. So, newlyweds Peter, played by David Manners, and Joan Allison, played by Jacqueline Wells, who later on was known as Julie Bishop. The Wikipedia gives her stage name of Julie Bishop when she later works for Warner Brothers. Anyway, on their honeymoon in Hungary, they learned that due to a mix-up, they must share a train compartment with Dr. Vitus Verdegast, played by Lugosi, a Hungarian psychiatrist. 18 years before, Verdegast went to World War I, never seeing his wife again. He has spent the last 15 years in an infamous prison camp in Siberia. On the train, the doctor explains that he is traveling to see an old friend, Hjalmar Polsig, played by Boris Karloff, an Austrian architect. Later, the doctor, Peter, and Joan share a bus, which crashes on a desolate, rain-swept road. Joan is injured, and the doctor and Peter take her to Polsig's home, built upon the ruins of Fort Marmaros, which Polsig commanded during the war. Verdegast treats Joan's injury, administering the tranquilizing drug hysocine. And by the way, Keith, do you know the other name of hysocine?
No,
scopolamine. That is scopolamine, which is still administered today. So, and that causes her to behave erratically.
I would like to get some of that.
You behave erratically without that drug, Vicky. You don't need it. I'm teasing. While Peter puts her to bed, Verdegast accuses Polsig of betraying the fort during the war to the Russians, resulting in the death of thousands of Austro-Hungarian soldiers. He also accuses Polsig of stealing his wife Karen while he was in prison. Previously, Verdegast killed Polsig's Black Cat, and Polsig explains that Verdegast has a strong fear of the animals. And by the way, that's ailurophobia for those people that are interested.
That's the only time you'll see the Black Cat correlation between the story and the movie.
Ailurophobia. That is correct. Well, that and the fact that the black cat can come back. Pulsick carries a second black cat around the house with him while he oversees his collection of dead women on display in glass cases, including
what was the
Kata.
deal with that?
Well, that comes from the mind of Edgar Ulmer, who was quite a character.
Yeah.
But anyway, Pulsick plans to sacrifice Joan in a satanic ritual during the dark of the moon. Pulsick had married Berdegast's wife, and when she died, he married his daughter, who was told her real father died in prison. He is seen reading a book called The Rights of Lucifer, while a beautiful blonde woman, and that's played by Lucille Lund, sleeps next to him. The blonde is Berdegast's daughter, thus Pulsick's stepdaughter, also named Karen. So his wife is also his stepdaughter. Verdegast, who is unaware of his daughter's presence, bides his time, waiting for the right moment to strike the mad architect. He also tries to persuade his foe to spare Peter and Joan, at one point literally gambling with their lives by playing a game of chess with Pulsick, which he loses. The moment comes during the beginning of the Satanist service, when a female acolyte sees something which causes her to scream and faint. Verdegast and his servant Thamal, played by Harry Cording, snatch Joan from the sacrificial altar and carry her into the catacombs beneath the house, where Peter is rendered unconscious by Pulsick's servant. Joan tells Verdegast his daughter is alive in the building somewhere. He discovers that Pulsick had killed his daughter, and in an insane rage shackles him to an embalming rack, where he proceeds to literally skin Pulsick alive. Joan tries to tear a key from the dead hand of Pulsick's servant, and Peter, regaining consciousness, mistakes Verdegast's attempt to help her as an attack and shoots him. Fatally wounded, Verdegast blows up the house, first letting the couple escape, but with Pulsick's rotten coat still upstairs. It has been a good game, he says before he dies. So that
when I was little, that one scene stuck out in my head for like ever. All I remembered was Bela Lugosi flaying Boris Karloff with the shadow, and they didn't really show it, but I don't know if it was just more intense with the shadow while he was flaying him or what.
I think it's quite shocking because I guess in a film from this time period, you just didn't expect that would even come into the consciousness of a film at this time. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what? Really?
Somebody alive?
I know.
The only criticism I got to say about the film is Edgar G. Edgar Ulmer. And the thing is that he was the set designer for the fantastic silent film of Fritz Lang's Metropolis.
Oh yeah.
And so when I knew that he did that before I actually saw the film, I expected these amazing sets, and I thought that the sets are good and they're in an Art Deco kind of way, but I thought there would be more of them. That's the only thing, because there's a lot of stark. There's a lot of stark.
It's very interesting because Edgar Ulmer, who by the way was a set builder, and he worked on The Golem, which was a silent film back in 1921.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Fritz Lang and so forth. And one of the things Ulmer helped to design the futuristic house of the Black Cat, and he wanted the film to approximate the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari in terms of the German expressionism that was being done at the time. But anyway, as we talked about before, we mentioned a few of the stars of the film. Egon Brecher also played the butler, and in the scene where you have the ritual, the satanic ritual, you can only see the organist by the top of his head. But the guy who played that, was it unknown at the time? Does anybody know who he turned into?
John
Carradine? Indeed, yes, that was John Carradine.
His son hung himself by having sex with himself. David. John must have been so proud.
I'm sure. Well, he literally had a dynasty.
Literally.
Yeah. 5-6 kids, grandchildren, great-grandchildren.
Went acting.
4 wives. I think he had 4 wives. He was
busy dude.
Some trivia. In the UK, the Black Cat was released under the title The House of Doom. And It got 70%. Excuse me, 87% score in Rotten Tomatoes. It also was rated in another area as 89 out of the 100 best horror films. However, at the time it was released, the New York Times gave it a very bad review. It stated Black Cat is more foolish than horrible. The story and dialogue pile the agony on too thick to give the audience a scare. But getting back, Boris Karloff said himself, and this kind of ties in between the book and the movie. He said in 1965, he said, "Poor Poe, the things we did to him when he didn't have to defend himself."
Right.
And it is really, I think Poe one would have wondered how Poe would have felt when he saw that film and they saw what they did to his movie.
It just kind of cracks me up, though. I was sitting here watching a Cary Grant movie. I don't know why it just pops into my head. You know how ADHD I am. But I was watching how men have evolved through cinema, I was watching, people with the long coats and stuff, and I just miss guys dressing like that, men, but, not in the rompers. I don't want to see any of you in a romper. I like the long coat and the hat. And then I noticed that there's no buffness back then. Boris Karloff has shirtless. There's no buff. This is not Jason.
To be honest, I was quite shocked seeing Boris Karloff shirtless, because when he gets out of the bed, when you first see him, you see the shadow, and you have this asymmetrical body shape,
right?
Because and the outfit that he's wearing is because he puts a belt on it. He's got like a really small waist, so it looks like a very Italian cut body. and then when you see the shirts, I was like, okay, well that looks. I mean, he's got a normal body. There's nothing wrong with it.
He does. It's just that men obviously were not hitting the gym and steroids in the 20s, 30s, and 40s.
I'm sure the cinematography also had something to do with it.
We probably had shoulder pads as well. That's probably what it was.
Oh yeah, they definitely had
shoulder like that.
Jack Pierce.
I have to sit there and say that. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, if you're looking for Edgar Allan Poe, the Black Cat,
no,
this is probably the worst false advertising that you're ever going to see. But as a film itself, I think it's quite a very good film. And I have to sit there and say that there were some. I was so mesmerized by the Julie Bishop's eyebrows. I mean,
oh my God,
AKA Jacqueline Wells.
Eyebrows are such a big thing. Because now you have to pencil them in nice and thick, and back then they were, I don't know what those were.
Well, to be honest, because you had the great big bow going on, the rainbow thing going on between bows. You always kind of had that look of Betty Boop surprise eyes sort of thing.
But that's what it was back then. It was the hair was like that, and the eyebrows were literally.
Yeah, I have to say though, I think this is the most penciled eyebrows I've ever seen. Because the thing is, she went on to have quite a long career here, and she's done a lot of things. And if you see other pictures of her, she did sort out her eyebrows later on. They weren't just they weren't so drawn on. But I have to say, first time you've seen her, is like, oh my God! Especially nowadays, I guess. With DVDs and the film and stuff like that, things are a lot clearer than we normally see. And I had to there say it was quite there. And I found that David Manners, who also has a long history in Universal horror films and stuff like this, the looks on his face and stuff like this, he's quite quizzical. You don't get a lot of emotion from him, but you do get these odd looks from him, which I think is quite endearing about him. The part where Bela Lugosi's here we got, Peter and Joan sleeping, and then Bella's trying to touch her hair while she's asleep, and David Manners Peter Allison wakes up and he kind of just looks at him like, what the hell are you doing?
I know.
And then Bella, like it's normal thing, just goes on this explanation about wife on a train. You're like, whoa.
I had a wife. But he was actually a good guy in this, but he was weird as fuck. But he was a good guy, and you don't really see Bela Lugosi doing the good guy, the upright, the nice.
Very rare, in fact, if at all. The only other time that he approximates that is in another picture that the two of them did, The Invisible Ray, where Lugosi played the doctor Benet, who even there getting into the invisible ray just for a second, there's a motive to Lugosi's Lugosi's treatment of the radium X that Karloff discovers. But getting back to the Black Cat. Of course, what you were talking about, Keith, it leads when the suitcase almost fell and the two of them, Manners and Lugosi, stopped it from falling. It leads to one of Lugosi's famous lines. It is, of course, better to be frightened than to be crushed. And that is just a number. I think that the writers did give a lot of classic Lugosi and Karloff lines, which I'm going to get into. By the way, I do want to mention, for those trivia buffs in general, that there was a Black Cat parade. Lamell, the Lamell Sr., was a big fan in Universal of stunts in order to promote the movies. And he decided to have a competition to pick the cat who would be the Black Cat in the film. And he invited all the kids and their parents from the neighborhood. And the parents went ahead and bought black cats for their kids specifically for the occasion. It was filmed in a Universal newsreel. The audio is now gone, but the video remains. And if you look on YouTube, you can find it under Footage Farm. In YouTube, and you see the kids were in a long line. Karloff and Lugosi were in costume, and they waited, and each one showed their cat to Lugosi and Karloff, who made nice comments and so forth. We don't know to this day whether a cat was picked, although from that contest, I do have my preference, because in the latter part of The Silent, you see these three cats. They're filming three cats, and the one in the middle are looking at the other two and yowling and scratching and biting at them. And I said to myself, that would have been the cat to pick for that movie, which would be great. But the other story from that, and that comes from Antonia Carlotta, who I understand may be a relative of Lamell, a grandniece or something, I'm not sure. But in her own vignette on YouTube, she describes that, what happened with all these cats? The parents apparently didn't want them. They just bought them for the. Just bought them for that. So they left them on the lot. And to this day, the great descendants of all those cats may be roaming around Universal, and that's the reason for that. But go ahead.
One thing I was going to say before I forgot, I was really, like I said, I haven't watched this movie since I was a little girl. Monster movie matinee out of Syracuse, of course. Mm-hmm. But I noticed that the wife, Karen, the daughter, whatever she was just, they were in the same bed.
Yes.
That was, I thought that was a little like, wow,
Well, it was
pre-Haze. It was pre-Haze.
After that, the couple had two single beds, didn't they?
Into the 60s.
Or the couple was sharing a bed. One of them had their foot on the floor at all times. So, but I guess the only thing I think this film is lacking, I think that we have Bela Lugosi doing a fantastic job, Boris Karloff, we have a really good storyline. But I kind of wish that Edgar Ulmer learned some stuff from Fritz Lang about mood and setting a scene in the filming. Exactly. Because I think, or even if like Todd Browning came on set and gave them some pointers about because this show does, the movie does lack a bit of atmosphere. It could have had some really good atmosphere going there. Some
kind
really
of clinical, don't you think?
Yeah, it had a really clinical look. It felt almost like a TV version or something like this from the clinical way that it's filmed. Even the camera doesn't move the couple times the camera does move, it kind of moves kind of shakily, like it's being thrown over some rocky ground or something like that.
Right.
But, and I said before, I was really expecting before I saw this some fantastic set designs. And because of what he's worked on before, and we kind of got we kind of got like soundstage with just very rarely little. We got a couple like Art Deco things going on, and we got a couple things that they could play around with, but I just expected probably a bit more sort of thing.
Well, the fact
Saying
remains,
that, but I think the script is very, very strong, and that's probably what keeps this going. So.
Well, that too, and the fact remains that despite the fact all the issues that you mentioned, Keith, the film only cost $95,000 to make, and it was one of the best of Universal money makers for that year, 1934. So they made a handsome profit out of it, and the whole deal was getting Karloff and Lugosi together for the first time. In fact, the promos for the film said Dracula and Frankenstein in the same film together. So they were obviously going by the prior reputations, especially Karloff, who had to be lured back to Universal. He had already made some mainstream success in The Lost Patrol and Rothschild, which I would love to see one day. He did a great role there, The House of Rothschild, I think, and so they really had to lure him there.
I love it when he played with Abbott and Costello.
Yes.
I have to admit, though, I think that if I was going to compare Karloff and Lugosi, I think Karloff is a more warmer character than Lugosi. I figure every time I see Lugosi, I kind of get a cold performance from him, which works in some, but him being the good guy in this sometimes didn't quite work. He just seemed like this weird man sort of thing. Well, when he's playing the villain or the baddie of the piece, I feel that he exudes at that very much. But Boris Karloff, I find that I can see him doing a good guy and the bad guy, and he can play both very, very well. But that also might have to do with language difficulties, where Boris Karloff wouldn't have language difficulty, where Bela Lugosi does have language difficulties.
You just hit the nail on the head. It was the language difficulties. Karloff used to say, "Poor Bela," because he did feel that Lugosi's inability to master the language. In fact, he did, my understanding, when he did Dracula, it was in phonetic. He literally, it was in phonetic English.
They say that, but if you,
I don't know.
But they do say that, but there has been stories that are coming out that they used the script that he was touring on around the country with. And so therefore, if he has been touring that for 3 years with the same script that they used for the movie, he should have learned the language before he did the movie. But I don't know I don't know which one of these stories are true, because there's that story that's true about he learned it phonetically. Then there's this other story that he did it on tour. So it's probably somewhere in the middle.
It's controversial. I do want to say, though, also as a crossover between the book and the movie, there were 2 other scripts, actually 3 other scripts, in contemplation for this movie, and Edgar Ulmer threw them all out to do his own. But one of them was a 1932 script by story editor Richard Schayer for Universal, which actually was true to Poe's original. And they had Karloff in it playing a character, Edgar Doe. And you can definitely see the relationship between Edgar Doe and Edgar Allan Poe, and he walled up the wife at the Cat in the Cellar in that particular movie. So there were plans at that particular point. They were just shelved when Ulmer took over. Lamel Jr., who was very friendly with Ulmer, essentially wanted. He didn't care what happened as long as Karloff and Lugosi were in the same movie, with the conditions that it had to have the black cat. That was it, essentially. It had to have the black cat mentioned to put the tie-in with Poe. You'll see the credits say it's suggested by Edgar Allan Poe. That movie was suggested by him, so that was really
by title only.
Exactly.
Right.
I do think that, but we're also dealing with 1934 depression as well. Depression.
Absolutely.
We're in the height of depression at this time.
People were escaping.
Maybe if they did do a faithful adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat, I would imagine it probably would have been too much. This is, there's a lot of stuff in this movie is probably way too much for a 1934 audience, which seemed to get.
I was surprised about the being in bed. I thought that would freak people out, having that young blonde girl in bed with Boris Karloff.
Lucille Lund.
Well, especially since it's a stepdaughter.
Norwegian.
Yes, that too.
And necrophilia.
Yes. Well, he had dead women all over the place in glass cases. Come on.
Well, that comes from the mind of Edgar Ulmer, and Edgar Ulmer was quite a character.
I have to say that was actually an excellent. I love the way that was filmed. Actually,
I was trying to figure out how he had them in there. I was trying to find.
They looked like they were floating inside this. And
I was trying to find how he did that.
And they didn't look like they were harnessed either. They just looked like they were floating. And I had to say that was very, very impressive. I said that. Because I thought the same as you, Vicky. I was thinking, how in the hell they did that? Because normally you can tell that they're hanging and they're suspended on a wire or a harness somewhere, but these people just thought they were floating. Especially the way their feet hanged as well. So you could tell that they weren't perched on anything either, because their feet were just hanging.
Yeah, I mean, it was really good. It was brilliant, actually.
I do want to also say that the information I've been giving, plus information I'm going to give, and I do want to give a plug, there is a great book, and it is a seminal work on the field. It's called Karloff and Lugosi, the story of a haunting collaboration by Gregory William Mank. Came out in 1990, and it is a story of all the movies they made together, and it's really, really chock full of stuff. And so one of the things that I did want to mention again about the Black Cat being deathless, when they originally were going to do the film, it was going to be with a totally different concept. And one of that was that the Black Cat was going to come back, not just those 2 times that you saw in the film, but it was going to come back a multiple number of times. One of which was, and this was never shot, or it wound up in the cutting room floor, was when they were in the accident, and in the rain-swept road, and she had the shoulder wound. You never really saw the shoulder wound until after it was bandaged. No. But in the original, you saw the shoulder wound and it was bleeding. The Black Cat would appear out of nowhere and start to lick the blood from the shoulder wound. Lugosi sees it, is horrified, takes the Black Cat and throws it against a rock, killing it. Another scene where the Black Cat is supposed to appear is when she's sleeping in bed. She's been drugged, and the Black Cat automatically appears in the bed and starts to stroke her body and rub up against her body with it. So there are, and that's only an example.
I guess that explains why the film is a bit disjointed in places. Yeah. Because I guess if we got those scenes that were supposed to be in it, then when she's in her half drug state, she appears, and she says something about the cat. I can't imagine what, but then it actually would make sense because it actually pertains to those 2 previous scenes. So that
it wasn't quite fluid the whole time.
Yeah, it was very staccato the way that some of the scenes were kind of put in, and there's stuff that they would allude to, but you never got the payoff from. Well, like that one scene where she's half drugged, and you're kind of wondering, oh, what's this about? And then the next morning she wakes up and she's fine. There was something missing.
There really was no continuity there.
In the original, they had planned to make her a lot more seductive while she was in the drugged state. Which
she came across that way. She did look like she was coming on to Boris Karloff.
And Lugosi in the original also would be affected by it, because this is the other thing in the original, and Vicky and I were talking about it before we got on. In the original, Lugosi was a hero until Boris took him through the catacombs downstairs, and then when Lugosi saw his wife and everything up there, it unhinged him. And in the original, then Lugosi comes back and he has his eye on Joan. He has his eye on Joan, and Lugosi in fact wants to rape her. And the chess game where Boris originally played with Lugosi was not Lugosi was not to get Lugosi, of course, in the film wanted to save them and get them out, but in the original it was for control of Joan. And in fact, the most interesting scene, which of course is the skinning, where Lugosi comes up with, what I'm going to do to you now. You ever see an animal that is flayed? I'm going to rip the skin from your body, bit by bit. I forgot one line. That's what I'm going to do to you now. But anyway, the original scene had Lugosi once had Lugosi lifting Karloff's head, and you actually saw him skinning the skin from his head and shoulders.
I wish you could find that scene. I need it.
It was never done. It was never done. It was on the cutting room floor. It was never done. It would have been marvelous.
Man.
They
that would
showed
have been too much for audiences back then, I think.
Well, it was for another reason, but do you remember when he lifts his head up?
Right.
And that's where they cut it, because the next scene would have been the reason he lifted his head up was so he could cut him with the knife. And that was, and then what happens is after he's done, Lugosi, who is mad, now sees Joan, and he comes toward her intending to rape her. And
after he skins Boris Karloff?
Was that after he skins Karloff? But that's not the end.
But that's
flaying and right for dessert. Why not?
Sorry, I laughed too hard. I don't want
moment.
I don't want the fans to get that from my laughter, but I love this scene because that's not the end of it. So he goes to shoot. So Lugosi goes to rape her. At that point, Peter comes in, sees Lugosi, and shoots Lugosi, and Lugosi falls down dead. But Karloff, in the meantime, has managed to get out of the shackles. And
his sexy self was going to wreak havoc.
With no skin.
He falls to the floor. Karloff falls to the floor in the original scene, and he starts to crawl towards Joan. And you see his head with all the skin ripped off, and he's crawling towards her because he wants to have some fun with her. And at that point, though, Joan finds
her. I mean, they're all in disarray and lacking skin, and they're still getting a Woody for crying out loud.
Don't underestimate the allure of an eye pencil.
And the black lipstick, and that's all due to Jack Pierce, by the way. He dressed Karloff up in black lipstick, and Karloff loved the outfit, by the way. He absolutely loved the.
I like his outfit. I like Karloff's outfit, actually. I thought that was quite cool.
He loved it.
He looked like a space alien from the 50s, but I still liked it.
He did. He looked like something out of Buck Rogers,
or Plan 9 for outer space.
Yeah,
almost. But so that's how that scene would have gone. And just as Karloff is crawling towards her to attack her, she finds the key from Lugosi, and she lets herself out of the room, along with it's something like that. But anyway,
where do you come up with this stuff? I know it ended up on the cutting room floor, but who decides after getting flayed that they want to have a go at the damsel in distress?
That's Ulmer.
I've got to read more.
I have to sit there and say that I kind of wish they kind of went to that way, because I figured with the way the film is at the moment, this is a fantastic film to see Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff spar off with each other. You can tell that they're having so much fun with the lines they're giving back and forth and the looks that they give each other, and this is what pays this film off.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, the hero of the piece, which is supposed to be David Manners, which
he's useless, I'm telling you.
Well, he was useless. Well, he was useless in Dracula as well. He's like being he's been demasculized. Basically, all his manliness is gone. There's no hero in him, and even to the point where he's stepping into the hero, he kind of like, not really. He's kind of like, shoots the person who's trying to save his, the love of his life. So it's kind of like this half-hearted thingy, and there's like no strength in him to protect his wife or to protect anything. It's like, oh, come on, just don't. We'll get our baggage later, and we'll just leave. And it's like, oh no, we can't go. So
Keith, here you go. In the original version, even David Manners was spiced up a little bit. There's a scene that also went to the cutting room floor where he goes into her room looking for her. She's in the bathroom, and he stops off at the door, and. And she says, "I'm not dressed." And then you see this smile come across his face, as if he'd like to go in and join her. So, you know, and there is also a cut scene. You'll remember when at one point she was looking for David. She was looking for the husband, and Karloff says, he's breakfasting. Well, they did have a breakfast scene that was also cut. And in the breakfast scene, you see David Manners yelling at all the servants. He's yelling about Hungary. He's yelling about pulsing. He's insulting the servants. He's just saying the breakfast is horrible. This is horrible. That's horrible. The servants are just smiling at him because they don't know what he's saying. That was supposed to be comic relief. So there were a number of things in the original. They did intend, and if the original had been done, I think it would have been fleshed out a lot more. The first scene of the original was supposed to actually be the wedding of Joan and Peter, which took place in the Vienna Cathedral. So you have a whole scene regarding the grandeur and the pageantry of that. And that, to me, would have been, in my opinion, would have been a better beginning than when you see them on the train.
Well, let's not forget Major Dormo.
I have to say this film plays a bit like a black comedy to a certain extent.
The two cops. Is that what you're talking about?
But whose small town is better?
Yeah,
that's actually very ethnic. I mean, you get that if you go into Europe and people are talking about their hometowns and they're having an argument about which hometown's the best one to visit. Trust me, that's a very ethnic thing to see. To me, that's like every time I go to Spain. So that scene was I'm pretty used to that one.
That wound up to be the only piece of comic relief in the film, and they were played by Henry Arnetta and Albert Conti, by the way. I actually think there's more comedy in the piece. The whole point where, he's asking to use, after they leave, and they got David Manners asking to use the phone, and he goes in. That was classic, that was quite comedic as well. I mean, there's a lot of. I don't know if that's comic when Boris comes up with the famous line, "You see, even the phone is dead."
But that's what I was saying. There is this black comedy falling against everything. Even like the scene where they first arrive and Boris Karloff kind of gets out of bed and he goes, "Do you want to drink?" And they have the three of them, and even the stuff that they're saying to each other, there is a comedy timing that's going on with the way they're going, and you can see like the little twinkle in both of their eyes as they're seeing each other. So even though I know the film is known to be emphasizing on atmosphere and eerie sounds and darker side, and maybe in 1934 it did, but looking at it through a 2020 lens, because this is actually the first time I've actually seen this.
Let's not forget the satanic ritual.
There is a dark thread flowing through the film, but as far as like what you're seeing and stuff like this, there is this twinkle in the eye of both of these actors because they're having a good time.
They've always had good exchanges in all their movies together. They had some serious chemistry together in all of their monster movies and stuff. So, I mean, they were brilliant together.
There were actually two more comedic scenes that were planned for the film that never made it. And,
we got totally ripped off.
One, I'm telling you. Well, one was when they're in the dining car, and Herman Bing, who is a character actor, comes in with their dinner, and proceeds to belch at them while they're eating in such a British fashion. And one of my favorites though is something actually where Ulmer was actually going to do a little Hitchcock thing at the end of the film when they're leaving Marmaris and they see the place that's bombed and everything. Well, Edgar Ulmer plays himself and comes along in a cab and picks them up. And Manners says to him, "Are you going to Visegrad?" And Ulmer looks at him and he says, "No, I'm not going to Visegrad. I just finished filming The Black Cat after a 15-day schedule, and I'm going to the sanitarium." And then he says, "But he goes, Visegrad's a long way from here, so if you want, I'll take you over there." And that was Edgar Ulmer. So he planned, I guess in 1934, people would have laughed at that. But
they knew who he was.
They knew who he was, yeah. Well, he thought they knew who he was.
Yeah, precisely. He might have been reading his own press.
What do you guys think about their classical music soundtrack where they're using?
I think at sometimes
lovely.
I think some of it I liked a lot. Sometimes I think it was kind of overused a little bit. Sometimes in some scenes where it's like you could actually got away with a little less, and other times it works fantastically well. But I think sometimes for me, I thought, okay, well, do you need this much of it? So sometimes.
It's a shame because 80% of the music is classical music: Tchaikovsky, Schubert, Brahms, Liszt. A lot of it was Liszt because Liszt was alleged to be a devil worshiper. And this was one reason why Edgar Ulmer wanted that.
And he's German as well, so there's a lot of...
Yes,
there's a lot of German composers.
I guess Aleister Crowley was a big hit back then. So.
And that was who the Karloff character was fashioned upon. Aleister Crowley, who was back then having these wonderful orgies in Italy, where women had bestiality with goats, and then the goat's throat would be slashed, and then the blood would be poured on the woman's back, and he got arrested.
Those were the days, my friend. We thought they never right.
I'm thinking that's forever. We live the life we choose. We fight and never lose. Yeah, they did fight. They never lost, did they? But actually, he did lose because in one of these rituals, a college student died after drinking cat's blood, and Mussolini threw him out of Italy as a result of that. And then after a big lawsuit, Crowley died in 1947. I'm going to say December 23rd, but I could be wrong. He was in poverty. And he always kind of regretted the good old days. Polzig, by the way, Polzig was named after an architect by the name of Hans Polzig that Ulmer worked with. And Hjalmar came from Ibsen, The Wild Duck. And Ibsen and Ulmer was a great fan of Ibsen. So there's that.
Peter and the Wolf, wasn't it? Ibsen? No,
yes.
Peer Gynt as well.
No, Peer Gynt is the Wolf. Yeah, Peer Gynt.
You know that house in Italy's for sale. Just so you know, in case you want to do something for fun, Keith, we'll go over and check that house out.
So you might want to wait till after the coronavirus leaves Italy.
Oh, that's true. It's not in North Italy, though.
Yeah, it is in North Italy.
Is it in North Italy? I thought it was South Italy.
Oh, no, you're talking about Crowley's place. Yeah, that's South
Crowley's
Italy.
place.
Speaking of houses, the house that you see on top of Montmartre was actually patterned after the Ennis Brown house, which is still which as of 1990 was standing at 2607 Glendower Avenue in Hollywood Hills, and was also called the Black Cat House. That house you will also see in the House on Haunted Hill and Terminal Man. So that was a house that was used as a prop for a number of horror films after the Black Cat, but the 34 Black Cat was the first in which that was used. And in terms of the music, I do want to give credit to Heinz Rohenheld, who was the music person on the Black Cat. Only a few years before he was pulled out of obscurity. He did really good work in the film in the late 20s, but then after that, nobody wanted him for some reason, and he was playing piano in hotel bars when the director when Ulmer tracked him down and persuaded him to do that. I do want to talk just very briefly about the classic speech in Latin that Karloff gave. And this is probably known to a lot of fans of the Black Cat, but Karloff, in my opinion, would be able to read names out of the phone book and sound sinister. The way Keith Chowdo, Vicky Ray, he was really able to do that. But the actual translation of the speech that he gave was completely harmless. And I'm just going to give you the phrases and the translation. Cum grano salis means with a grain of salt. Altit cadre cedere non potest. The brave may fail, but cannot yield. Lupith pilum mutat non mentem. The wolf changes its skin, but not its mind. Magna et veritas et proebalabit. Great is truth, and it shall prevail. Acta exteriora indicantitoriora secreta. That which I admit I do not know, I cannot lose. Ad cec mentem memento ribut in adri servare mentem. The lost that is lost is not lost at all. Brutum fulmen, bright lightning. And then he does the first verse all over again. And then in somnus omnis vere credere etc. Judge a tree by fruit, not leaves.
Doesn't sound like any satanic ritual I've ever been to.
Thank you. That was a joke in itself. It was not a satanic ritual, and that's the thing. And the thing that made me think of Keith. Insanus omnius fuere credit ceteris is every madman thinks everyone is crazy. Isn't that true, Keith?
Everyone's crazy.
Everyone's crazy.
That could be our new mantra.
And finally, picatho paene et innocens. He who repents is almost innocent. So, as you can see, that speech was an inside joke in and of itself, because it wasn't satanic at all. It was just a compilation of benign phrases in Latin stuck together, and it's a tribute to Karloff that he was able to make such a sinister to do that with such a sinister delivery, which scared the hell out of people and made that one of the better scenes in the film.
So what I think we're going to do is we are going to give our final thoughts. So, Vicky, what is your final thoughts of Black Cat, the short story, and Black Cat, the 1934 film?
The film, I totally love it. Even though I didn't really notice that there was a continuity issue until we started talking about it. Because there's a few times I've gone, wow, that didn't quite fit. But, I figured, well, it's the 30s and who knows what was going through their mind back then. I mean, it was, that movie stayed with me ever since I was a little kid, because I never forgot Boris Karloff, his silhouette being skinned by Bela Lugosi. That's the one thing that stuck out in my mind all these years later after watching it again. And I mean, I don't even think that they wanted the movie to be as cheesy as it is, but you can't stop watching it. It's just, it's that good. I mean, I love that old stuff. I mean, I love it. I think that anybody that likes horror or is into historical film or as a film student or anything, I think it's a definite must-see and should be on your resume.
And what about yourself, Tom? What are your thoughts?
Well, I have to tell you, first of all, the film is classic in my view.
Exactly.
It is judged as the best of the teaming between Karloff and Lugosi. They really did. I do want to say the reason you see the film the way it is today is because it was reshot. They ended after 15 days of shooting on February 28th, 1934. And a week later, they went back for 3.5 days to reshoot. And that was for two reasons. One of which was that Lugosi was very, very annoyed at Ulmer. Lugosi had convinced Ulmer, and the two of them spoke in German, interestingly enough. I never knew that Lugosi spoke German, but they did, and Lugosi convinced Ulmer to make him a benign character. Ulmer did a bait and switch on him, and had the film shot with Lugosi being completely unhinged after the dungeon experience. And after it wrapped, Lugosi went to the higher-ups, very, very, very upset about it. But that was not the factor that did it, because Lugosi was regarded, unfortunately, as inferior to Karloff. Karloff did have a better time with the movie than Lugosi did. Lugosi was still steaming, by the way. It looked like they got along with each other, Vicky, but in fact, Lugosi was still kind of upset, and it is said that Lugosi had an ego. Lugosi turned down Frankenstein in 1931, saying, "I do not want to play a dumb brute," and Karloff went ahead and made a masterpiece out of it.
Yes, he did.
Karloff, unknown at the time. Lugosi resented Karloff for it, so there was always this bit of jealousy between Lugosi and Karloff.
That's what made them so great together.
It's a good point. It's a good point because, and it is said that scene where he skins Karloff alive.
Probably wanted to.
He wanted to. Yep. That was why Lugosi had such fun with it. But even there, they had to do it in a few takes because Lugosi kept garbling the scene with the English. And so they had to do it over. What's his name? The director also thought Lugosi was overacting a lot. He kept asking Lugosi to play it down.
I don't think he could, though. He was just so dramatic.
Well, he did the best he could. But anyway, so there was Lugosi, but also Lamel Jr. When he saw that scene of Karloff being skinned literally and then crawling on the floor, he was so scared that his father was going to have a coronary from looking at that he said he didn't even want the father to know. He said, no, this has got to be redone and it's got to be. So they all did a big rush job. And that's why I think you see some disjointed areas of the film, because when you do something like that, you can't totally eliminate what was actually going to happen.
Right.
And so you see little hints of that, but you really have to look at the movie closely. And so that being said, it was for all the good stuff, and Lugosi saying things like baloney. No, I think not. The baloney thing would follow Lugosi. He would say that in other pictures. There was so many good lines in the film that if we started, and of course we can't remember. You must forgive Dr. Verdigast. He is the unfortunate victim of one of the commoner phobias, but in an extreme form. He had an intent and all-consuming horror of cats with a lisp, the famous Boris Karloff lisp. He had a lisp, but he was such a good actor that he was able to infuse that in his parts to his advantage. And the look that he gives when he says of cats, and he looks up in the sky, when in reality he should be looking down below at the devil that's forcing him. But all this so well written. The music, I'm sorry to say that the music went on to be used in Flash Gordon movies, in the serials in the 1930s, if you look closely, and I think in the Buck Rogers films as well, which is really a shame, because the score, it was the first movie to use classical music and sound to that particular extent. And there were a few pieces composed by the composer, something called Hungarian Burlesque, which is when the two cops are talking. That's a light takeoff on the Lugosi March. And also something called Morgue, when Karloff is giving the monologue as they're in the cellar. So we do have to give some credit to the composer here, but in general, what they did with something that could have been taken out of the theaters by censors for its horror, and what they did, that's to the credit of cast and crew.
Right. Agreed.
Yep.
And as for my own thoughts, it's kind of a weird thing. I love the short story Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat, and I think it's fantastic. If I was going to see this and I was hoping to see Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat, I would have been highly disappointed. But seeing it as his own film out and leave Edgar Allan Poe to the wayside for this, I sit there and say that I love the interaction between Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. I think that works really well. There's some eerie, nice scenes, like with the women hanging from the
That was brilliant. That really was.
I do think that there's a lack of coherency sometimes with the story, but I did enjoy watching it. I enjoyed it a lot, but
yeah,
I do think the music for me sometimes is kind of overplayed. I think they could have cut back on a little bit. Cut back on
it. Maybe, so to
speak. Sometimes to the point where actually some of the actors' lines, you sometimes had to like really keen your ear in on it.
Yeah,
sometimes.
Exactly.
But saying that, I think that if it wasn't for Karloff and Lugosi, I don't think it would be the film it is today. I think it all hinges on those two. And it would have been nice if Ulmer knew how to film something with more of an atmosphere. Mm-hmm. Because I think if you had someone like Todd Browning or someone of that ilk filming this, could you imagine how with the same with everything that you have here? Can you imagine the atmosphere?
Right.
Because even because you kind of like see the building in the distance because it's so in shadow, you don't really get the grandioso version of the once you get inside the house, and the house kind of looked like it was a bit too clean and clinical looking. Maybe you have cobwebs and kind of dark.
It did look kind of like a set from IKEA,
Yeah, if it did have that cabinet, Dr. Caligari, if it had that kind of eerie set to it, set that had. If anyone get a chance to see the silent film of that, it's quite phenomenal to see as far as the way it's filmed and stuff like this.
But do you remember that clock that is a forerunner of the digital clock, in my opinion? Where and I thought that was very very futuristic. By the way, I do want to chime in and say that Lugosi had a fear of cats, and that probably helped him in his performance. He was actually afraid of cats. Hope Leninger, his fifth wife, divulged that information after he died, and she talked about a portrait of Lugosi with the black cat right in front of him, and he said, "Oh, if Bela had been alive to see that, he would have been, it was, I don't know where that came from, but apparently Lugosi never saw it." And she said he would probably have run out of the room. So that's another little tribute, a little piece of trivia. But I found the trivial aspects of the film quite fascinating, almost just as fascinating as the film itself.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I did like the film, and it's a very short film, 69
only an hour, a little more than an hour. Yeah,
not long at all.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I guess that wraps up our 100th episode here at the Literary License Podcast. Today is our 100th episode anniversary, so yay, we made it to 100 episodes.
Nice free gift.
And of course, it's the beginning of the Guilty Is What Guilty Does month. And next week, we'll be covering The Night of the Hunter, the classic film starring Robert Mitchum, and Looper, starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis, talking about guilty people who are trying to get away with murder. And of course, we are holding our competition. So if you send a copy of a picture of your pets to info@lopodcast.com, you can win a hoodie, a Literary License Podcast hoodie that we're giving away one per month. And of course, we also been nominated for the Rondo. So if you would like to take part in voting during the Rondos, the information will be found in our show notes, which is underneath here, which you can also find our show notes on our other podcasting platforms, which includes YouTube, SoundCloud, Podbean, Spotify, Cashbox, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and so on and so forth. We're also on iTunes as well. So if you just look on the show notes there, it'll tell you how you can vote. And there's plenty of lovely and fantastic people you need to vote for. People who write for magazines and keeping the horror genre alive and keeping classic horror alive. So make sure you vote for them and help get people that need to be recognized their recognition that they deserved. And, of course, you can also follow us on social media, which are on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, if you're looking for interesting pictures of everything that we are covering here. And, of course, Tumblr, where you can find our book reviews. And we're also got a Goodreads group now. So if you want to start joining for Season 4, we'll be doing a book club. So make sure you join on to Goodreads and look up the Literary License Podcast, and we'll have more information about that in our newsletter, which make sure you sign up to at www.llpodcast.com. Sign up to our subscribing newsletter, and you'll get one newsletter per month letting you know what we're up to, some exciting things to look forward to. And we'll be also mentioning stuff about giveaways and stuff that you could be earning and be winning in end of season 3 and season 4 that we start in September 2020. So that is good night for myself. Say good night, Tom.
Good night, everybody. It was a pleasure to be here.
Good night, Vicki.
Good night, guys. Good night, everybody.
And we'll be continuing our Guilty Is What Guilty Does month with The Night of the Hunter and Looper coming at you next week.
This has been a Literary License Podcast production. Good night.